Yeah. On Facebook.
In Africa, at the service of reconciliation, peace and justice. The church is in Africa, at the service of reconciliation, peace and justice.
This is the Africa service of Vatican Radio.
Welcome to our half-hour daily program for Africa.
In this edition today, our bulletin of church news to be followed by panorama, and then our feature of culture and society. Today we shall close with a segment dedicated to young people. My name is Kanyanta Godfrey Kampamba. Peace is not often achieved by famous people, but by the daily determination of ordinary men and women. This is the Twitter message of Pope Francis on Thursday, the day when he received in audience members of the International Catholic Legislators Network at the Vatican. In his address to the group, the Holy Father urged them to work for a more just, fraternal, and peaceful world through legislative processes that promote the good of all and address situations of inequality in society. Father Benedict Mayaki reports.
In his prepared address, the Pope offered his reflections on three key words: justice, fraternity, and peace, which he hopes can guide the discussions of the meeting, which is being held to consider the important theme of advancing justice and peace in the current geopolitical situation of the world. The first word, justice, said the Pope, is defined as the will to give to each person what is his or her due, though, according to the biblical tradition, it involves concrete actions aimed at fostering right relationships with God and with others so that the good of individuals as well as the community can flourish. Hence, in this world where many cry out for justice, the Holy Father challenged the legislators to work to safeguard and enhance within the public sphere those right relationships that allow each person to be treated with the respect and love that is due to them. On the second key word, Pope Francis said that a just society cannot exist without the bond of fraternity and without a sense of shared responsibility and concern for the integral development and well-being of each member of the human family. For this reason, a global community of fraternity based on the practice of social friendship calls for a better kind of politics, one truly at the service of the common good. The Pope thus encouraged efforts geared towards the adoption of policies and laws that seek to address in a spirit of solidarity the many situations of inequality and injustice threatening the social fabric and the inherent dignity of all people. Reflecting on the third word, peace, the Holy Father stressed that the effort to build our common future demands the constant search for peace. To achieve this, Pope Francis highlighted the importance of lawmakers and political leaders, noting that true peace can only be obtained through far-sighted political processes and legislation in order to build a social order founded on universal fraternity and justice for all. Concluding his address, Pope Francis prayed that the Lord may enable the Catholic legislators become a leaven for the renewal of civil and political life and witnesses of political love for those most in need. He further prayed that their zeal for justice and peace may continue to guide them in the noble pursuit of contributing to the advancement of God's kingdom in our world. I'm Father Benedict Mayaki.
Also on Thursday, Pope Francis had a number of appointments that included an audience with a number of bishops from Chile, the Apostolic Nuncio to the Democratic Republic of Congo, Archbishop Ettore Balestrero, and the Apostolic Nuncio to Morocco, Archbishop Victor Rallo. The Holy Father also received in private audience on Thursday the President of the Republic of Hungary, Madame Katalin Novak, and her entourage, and the ex-president of East Timor, Mr. K. Ralaksana Guzmao. The ambassador of Holland, Madame Caroline Wager, also called on the Pope for farewell greetings as her tour of duty to the Vatican has come to an end. The last appointment of Pope Francis on Thursday was with the members of the Secular Institute's World Conference, whom in his address to them, he encouraged to bear witness to God's tenderness and love through daily acts of love. Deborah Lubav has this report.
The Pope remembered how the Church and the people of God are on a journey among and with people. He said ours is an outgoing church, not one that is distant or separated from the world. Rather, our church, he underscored, is immersed in the world and its history, meant to be its salt and light, the seed of unity, its hope and salvation. He praised their mission, which places them in the midst of the people, and told them they are called to experience all the precariousness of the provisional and all the beauty of the absolute in ordinary life. That is, on the streets where people walk, also where fatigue and pain are greatest, also where rights are discarded, as well as where war divides people and where dignity is denied. Pope Francis recalled that this is where, as Jesus showed us, that God continues to give us his gift of salvation. When seeking strength and courage, the Pope recommended pray and silently contemplate Christ. The prayerful encounter with Jesus, he said, fills your heart with his peace and love, which you can then give to others. The Holy Father praised their vocation of opening up frontier paths and warned against losing momentum. Do not tire, he said, of bringing to the world the proclamation of the splendid gifts of the risen Lord. Pope Francis concluded by entrusting their work to the Blessed Mother. I'm Deborah Castellano-Lubov.
O reditse Radio Ecclesia, motswedi wa thuto le kgothatso ya tumelo. Be still and know that I'm God.
Bring some spirit-filled peace into your hectic schedule every morning with your morning devotion show. Radio Ecclesia.
The bishops of South Africa and Mozambique are seeking formal relations in order to save migrants better. This position came to light during the recent visit to South Africa of the bishop in charge of the Commission for Migrants, Refugees and Displaced Persons, Bishop Atanasio Amise Kanira of the Mozambican Diocese of Luchinga. Bishop Kanira was on a fact-finding mission in South Africa about the challenges faced by Mozambican migrants working in South African mines. One of the biggest challenges is integrating into the South African society. While in South Africa, the Mozambican bishop met with the Archbishop of Johannesburg, Buti Joseph Tagle, who has been active in caring for migrants and refugees. Bishop Joseph Merikizito of the Diocese of Aliwal, the liaison bishop for migrants and refugees at the Southern Africa Catholic Bishops' Conference, and Bishop Robert Mogapi Mpiwe of Rutzenburg, whose diocese has many mines that also employ Mozambican migrants. The bishops from the two countries concluded that there was need for a pastoral model that recognizes that most Mozambican migrants and migrants from nearby countries who go to work in the South African mines for brief periods inevitably end up settling in South Africa. This is in spite of the fact that though they initially intend to one day return to their countries of origin, many end up making a life in South Africa, and this calls for a different pastoral approach geared towards integration, they agreed. You are tuned to the Daily Africa service of Vatican Radio.
African News Panorama.
The chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has urged the UN Security Council to accelerate action to help deliver justice for thousands of people in Sudan's Western Darfur region. Karim Khan said in a virtual briefing from the Sudanese capital Khartoum on Tuesday that his just concluded visit to Darfur reinforced his resolve to press for a greater focus and more resources to arrest and bring to trial alleged ringleaders of the violence. Mr. Khan said that the people of Darfur are tired of promises and that this is the time to move forward. The vast Darfur region was engulfed in bloodshed in 2003 when rebels from the territory's ethnic, Central and Sub-Saharan African community launched an insurgency, accusing the Arab-dominated government in Khartoum of discrimination and neglect. The response of the government under then-President Omar al-Bashir was to carry out a campaign of ethnic cleansing against non-Arabs, co-opting mostly Arab Janjaweed militia who were accused of mass killings and rapes. Up to 300,000 people were killed and 2.7 million were driven from their homes. In April, the first ICC trial to deal with atrocities by Sudanese government-backed forces in Darfur
began in The Hague, Netherlands. The defendant, Janjaweed leader Ali Muhammad Ali Abdi Al-Rahman, also known as Ali Kushaib, pleaded innocent to all 31 charges of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Mr. Khan said the prosecution's case is expected to conclude early next year. In neighboring South Sudan, the UN has warned that thousands of people are trapped by heavy fighting between rival armed groups. Since the clashes began 10 days ago in the northern town of Tonga, the UN said only about 200 people have been able to flee to safety in Malakal, the state capital. Flooding in the north of the country, which has led to dozens of deaths, has also hindered their escape, the UN said. South Sudan is reeling from months of intercommunal fighting caused by tribal rivalries, cattle rustling, and long-running border issues. The recent violence is putting at risk a fragile peace deal signed in 2018. President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud of Somalia has vowed to wage an all-out war against the militant group Al-Shabaab. The new president's comments comes just days after the militants staged a deadly attack on a hotel in the capital Mogadishu, killing at least 21 people and leaving more than 100 injured. In his first address to the nation since Friday night's attack, President Mahmoud promised to crush the Al-Qaeda-linked group. You're tuned to the Africa Service of Vatican Radio.
This is Culture and Society, and you are welcome to the program. My name is Kanyanta Godfrey Kampamba. Public service journalism is in danger of extinction because of the impact of COVID-19. As it is well known, media which serves the public interest not only provides vital information communities need in order to take informed action, but it also dispels misinformation, strengthens democratic accountability, and boosts sustainable development. Yet, regardless of this important role that public media plays in society, journalism has been hard hit by the coronavirus pandemic. The impact is so much so that it has dried up revenue and put its very existence into question. Shitao Vyas is the founding executive director of International Fund for Public Interest Media. In a special interview with Vibhu Mishra from the United Nations News, Vyas speaks about the fund's bold $1 billion rescue plan to help save journalism for the public good.
It's actually very hard to think of a time in recent history when access to trustworthy information has been more important. And yet this public good, this provision of services that they're providing, this vital public good, is dying out due to a lack of funding. And we know why this lack of funding exists. The advertising model of the internet has decimated the business model of journalism. The fact is that news media have nearly always struggled to turn a profit. But despite this, they have managed to survive with a commercial model. But with print media revenues in decline and income from digital media not adequately compensating, that business model has reached breaking point, and COVID has exacerbated this. Low and middle income countries are disproportionately affected, receiving less digital advertising revenue from platforms than what's received in richer countries. And actually, they're finding it harder to respond to this business model challenge. So at a time when access to reliable information can be a matter of life or death, evidence from multiple surveys, such as the Journalism and the Pandemic Project, show that the global pandemic has accelerated the financial decline of these organizations around the world. In fact, the global loss in revenue is estimated at over $30 billion for the last 12 months alone for newspapers. So experts are warning that this loss could lead to a media extinction event.
People and communities are depending more than ever on media to give them accurate and timely information. Can public support, which is high right now, particularly surging traffic on digital media, be enough to stave off other factors that might lead to an extinction-level threat?
There's been a consistent trend, actually, throughout the pandemic that people have flocked in huge numbers to media that the public regard as trustworthier. Maria Ressa, the founder of Rappler in the Philippines, has called this flight to quality. But unfortunately, those increases in audiences are not necessarily translating into increased revenues or a viable business model. So the same media organizations who the public is relying on to keep them informed is often at the same time laying off journalists. And this is the challenge. So in many markets, even when the digital traffic is very high, it's not translating into significant revenues in low-income markets. An example of this is Al Mirabad in southern Iraq, which is a radio station but also has a digital platform. They have massive listenership figures and their YouTube traffic is in the millions. But the revenue they're receiving from digital advertising revenue is not commensurate. And actually, it does need external support to survive and deliver their services.
Against this, what needs to happen? Is the answer merely boosting advertising revenue, or are there actions that governments, the public, and the private sector must take?
There's a clear market failure. Journalism is struggling to fund itself, and people are expecting content for free now. And that's kind of hard to recover from, but it's not impossible. But what we do know is it will take us time to figure out new models that work. Now, what do we do when there's a market failure for other public goods? Well, usually the state finds a way of supporting these goods. But in media, that's really complicated because if states fund journalism, it kind of gets messy and there's just too much scope for editorial interference. So the idea with the International Fund for Public Interest Media is that we will sustain media during the time that it needs it the most to avoid this media extinction event. Our mission is to help these organizations during a period where their business model needs to evolve by doing effectively three things. The first is to provide support that will be financial and non-financial to help them sustain. But it's really important to note here that these are not operational subsidies that will reinforce a dependency culture, but actually what we want to do is help them catalyze new solutions for sustainability. These grants may provide match funding or technical support to help them create a new sustainable model of operation that will enable them to last in the digital world. But thirdly, we also want to create new approaches to supporting media in countries at the macro level as well, to create an environment that can optimize success and make the market of support work more efficiently. We are seeing really new promising models of journalism, whether that's membership models, models that are using more direct relationships with audiences. And these models could emerge as innovative and sustainable, but those models don't emerge overnight. And we're going to need to support the sector while we figure out how to evolve. And the cost of not doing that is just unimaginable.
Are some media outlets better positioned than others to weather the storm? Is there a regional dimension to this crisis?
The worst effects of the media crisis are in countries with either A, already weak advertising markets, B, where the economic as well as the political impacts of the COVID pandemic have hit media revenue the hardest, or C, where the media are especially vulnerable to political co-option or capture. Some governments have used the restrictions justified by the pandemic to actually further curtail media. In this sense, there's not necessarily a region specific. Some media markets are more vulnerable or resilient than others within specific regions. But our fund will focus on low and middle income countries, but it will be organized in a highly decentralized way with the most funding decisions decided at the regional level. It's really important that decision making is as close as possible to the countries that we support, because we want to tailor our support strategies to the specific country context within which we're working in. We really want to have a strong understanding of the media markets within which we operate, and also, really importantly, the political economy of the countries and the potential for a long-term approach that might chart an exit strategy from the current media market failure.
Can you tell us more about the International Fund for Public Interest Media and how it aims to help?
This idea has been in the making for almost 2 years now, and it's been guided by an advisory group of international journalists and media experts. Our idea, which is massively ambitious, but it needs to be, is to create a large-scale $1 billion response to this media market failure, this media extinction, focused especially on low and middle-income countries. It's a big idea, but trying to tackle this problem requires a big idea. We've undertaken extensive consultation with a wide range of stakeholders to this fund, and based on that evidence, we've designed this fund really with a number of principles in mind. The first is that it's an independent multilateral fund which will allow media to be supported without the undue political interference from either donors or governments. We'll be supporting genuinely independent media. Historically it's been hard to fund media due to this politicization, and we think an independent fund of this type, an independent multilateral fund of this type, would really help address this issue. The second principle is around the long-term sustainability of media organizations. We want to create a hub for experimenting with business models that could emerge as the future of journalism. We also want to support the enabling environment that supports and can nurture these media outlets. Our aim is that this fund sustains media over a 10 to 15-year period so that it can evolve and develop its own sustainable strategies. Third principle is that we want a decentralized model where we're working really closely with local organizations that understand the political economy and the country context within which we're working in. This fund cannot be removed from the realities that are faced on the ground. And finally, we're seeking new funding from those who have not historically supported media in the past. So we don't want to divert funding from the already great existing media support organizations that exist, but what we want to do is create a step change in the amount of funding that it's providing.
Founding Executive Director of International Fund for Public Interest Media, Sheetal Vyas, speaking there with Vibu Mishra from the United Nations News about the fund's bold $1 billion rescue plan to help save journalism for the public good. And that is all we have time for today. Until next week at the same time, my name is Kanyan Tagodifri Kampamba.
And now, news for young people.
Hello and welcome to the program. I am Festus Tarawali. Pope Francis on Wednesday remembered the many Ukrainian and Russian children who have become orphans as a result of the war in Ukraine. In remarks at the end of his catechesis at the general audience, the Pope said being an orphan has no nationality. The children, he said, have lost their father or their mother, whether they are Russian or Ukrainian. Meanwhile, a recent statement by the UN Children's Fund, UNICEF, says nearly 1,000 boys and girls have been killed or injured in the war in Ukraine. In the statement, the executive director of UNICEF, Catherine Russell, also emphasized the need for peace. Lydia O'Kane has that report.
The grim figures are those that the UN has been able to verify. The organization believes, however, the true number is much higher. As populated areas such as Mariupol, Luhansk, Kremenchuk and Vinnytsia are targeted, the use of explosive weapons has caused most of the child casualties. Once again, as in all wars, the reckless decisions of adults are putting children at extreme risk. There are no armed operations of this kind that do not result in children being harmed, Russell says. She points out that beyond the horror of children being killed or physically hurt in attacks, almost every child in Ukraine has been exposed to deeply distressing events, and those fleeing violence are at significant risk of family separation, violence, abuse, sexual exploitation, and trafficking. At this time of year, children are preparing to go back to school. But for kids caught up in this war, the executive director says that heading back to the classroom is a stark reminder of how much children in Ukraine have lost. UNICEF estimates that 1 in 10 schools have been damaged or destroyed, and the education system itself has been devastated by the escalation of hostilities across the country. Russell stresses that all children need to be in school and learning, including children caught up in emergencies. Children in Ukraine and those displaced by this war are no exception, she says. The Children's Charity continues to call for an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine and for all children to be protected from harm. This includes ending the brutal use of explosive weapons in populated areas and attacks on civilian facilities and infrastructure. Ukraine's children urgently need safety, stability, access to safe learning, child protection services, and psychosocial support, says the executive director. But more than anything, Ukraine's children need peace. I'm Lydia O'Kane.
Education Cannot Wait, abbreviated as ECW, the United Nations Global Fund for Education in Emergencies and Protracted Crisis, on Tuesday issued its annual results report, which revealed that despite global upheaval, the fund and partners have continued to expand their response. The report indicates that ECW investments have reached close to 7 million children and adolescents 48.4% of whom are girls, since becoming operational in 2017. Yasmin Sharif, Director of Education Cannot Wait, reflected on the progress made by the fund during the presentation of the report on Tuesday.
Now, this report highlights the results for 1 year, what we have achieved. And I want to stress, when we speak about Education Cannot Wait as the UN's fund, we speak also for our great colleagues working for the High Commissioner for Refugees, for UNICEF, World Food Programme, for UNESCO, our great civil society organizations, Save the Children, Jesuit Refugee Service, Plan International, Norwegian Refugee Council, War Child, and many, many hundreds of local NGOs and civil society organizations, and of course, since we are in the UN, the member states that are providing the funding and the member states who are hosting us because they are affected by a crisis, such as the countries in the Sahel. We work very closely with all the ministers of education across the Sahel, Central African Republic, Chad, in South Sudan, in Colombia, in Yemen, and Syria, Iraq, and so forth. So we are all in this together, and everyone deserves a credit. Now, in this report, and this is what is interesting with this Education Cannot Wait, because we are building our model on the Secretary General's reform and common agenda, namely working together, joint programming, where we are many actors in one program and we provide a financial investment. In 1 year, we have reached 3.7 million children and adolescents who live in the darkest corners of the world, whether in militia-controlled areas of Central African Republic, whether they are in Syria, in the countryside, in Aleppo, or they are in Mali, Bamako, or in Chad, or in the Democratic Republic of Congo, even in Afghanistan. 3.7 million with a holistic quality education. That means we have reached those left furthest behind. In total, Education Cannot Wait, since we became operational in 2017, we have reached nearly 7 million children and youth.
Yasmin Sharif, Director of Education Cannot Wait, the United Nations Global Fund for Education in Emergencies and Protracted Crises. She was speaking on Tuesday during the launch of the annual results report of ECW. And that's all for this edition of News for Young People. Till the same time next week, I am Festus Tarawali.
This is the Africa service of Vatican Radio. Praised be Jesus Christ. Laudetur Jesus Christus.
The church